Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Natasha Meikle and Lawrence Conley for the ACSOM Bulletin. And plenty to discuss as always. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you?
All good, thank you.
It's a big few days in the world of Celtic with regards to the release of a statement and also the interim results. We spoke yesterday about it. It would be interesting to get your take on it. I've seen a lot of the social media reaction to the interim results, but there's somebody delivering something. I'm not sure if it's who it's to, but so Lawrence, when you're looking at that, really, it was unsurprising, wasn't it? The fact that, yes, there was some losses there, but we expected that, didn't we?
Yeah, I think we've expected that. We're far from immune, but, see what we want, like about Peter Law, we did kind of run us financially well. So I think probably fiscally, if we've suffered those losses, there'll be clubs out there have suffered bigger losses in proportion to their turnover. So I don't think it's something that we can overly worry about. There's been losses, obviously we've already sold Frimpong, we're expecting some sales coming up. We don't know, this summer, and we don't know what other changes are in, but yeah, I'm not overly concerned with it, but I think maybe most football fans are more concerned with winning on the park than what's on the balance sheet.
Yeah, I mean, very early on, when we were in the first lockdown, we did a few different podcasts with David Lowe. People will remember David from Fergus McCann's time. He was Fergus's financial advisor. And, we painted a bleak picture of the future in relation to Scottish football. But I think David was very realistic in relation to Celtic's future. And the way that he spoke back then has more or less come to fruition. And I guess that when we're looking at it, Natasha, we're looking at how Celtic will recover from losses of 6 million. Because as Lawrence says, our biggest challengers have had much bigger losses over the last number of years, year on year, than what Celtic have had this year. And that is in the worst case scenario that we could possibly imagine, with no fans going to the games, etc. So the recovery is what I'm interested in. And I'm wondering how big a part of that recovery will be the sale of the biggest assets. Do you think we will enter a period where as much as another 3 big names will go in the summer?
Unfortunately, I think that is how the club will look to balance the books. I mean, the losses weren't unexpected. One of the club's biggest revenue streams has been cut because of the pandemic. And naturally, there's going to be a loss. Like Lawrence has said, like you talked about yesterday, it's not a surprise, and it's going to be something felt across the board, not just in Scottish football either. So the losses are there. It's all about how the club look to balance the books. Like Lawrence said, the fans are more concerned about what's happening on the pitch rather than off it. But the concern here is that what's happening off the pitch in terms of the revenue loss is going to affect who we actually see on the pitch. It's easy enough to balance those books by selling a player like Edward or Ajer and not replacing them with a player of the same ability as Edward or Ajer. And I think that's probably how the club see a quick fix to turn this revenue loss around.
The big concern again is, in the past we might have brought over a promising player like Ajer, who had been identified by Ronny Deila with his knowledge of Norwegian football, or we bring someone in like Edouard from an academy in France. We won't have that freedom. When it comes to signing players, it's going to be more difficult to sign players from overseas. So we're going to have a different market in which to operate as well, Lawrence. Does that concern you, or do you think this more back to basics approach will mean that we're very much more careful in the way that we sign players? Because in the past, we've brought in a plethora of guys that really haven't made the grade, and we've spent a lot of money doing that. Do you think that these forced changes will result in a completely different culture when it comes to recruitment?
It's definitely going to have an impact. We've just got to make sure we're making the best of what we have and what we operate in. I don't think the SFA have got their foreign employment rights in order yet, or agreed with the Home Office. They were offered to do the same as the English FA, I think, and they've knocked that back, but they haven't SFA haven't decided what they're doing. Mm-hmm. For us, it will make it more difficult to bring people over, you would think, but at the same time, we're operating in Scotland, it's going to make it more difficult for everyone. We just need to make sure we've got the right structure in place, which is hopefully part of the review. We know the new CEO coming in, is it going to be a director of football? And I think it can all falls from that and from the scouting. there are gems out there in the UK or who perhaps would qualify for a work permit for the UK, depending on their international appearances or whatever the criteria is. We just need to make sure we are making the best of our scouting network, and when we identify someone, making sure we get the deal over the line, making sure we get first choice targets, and get them in early enough that they're bedded in for Europe. Don't be signing them after Champions League is gone. Don't be repeating the mistakes of previous years.
I'm keen to get onto the comments because there's plenty of Celtic fans looking to air their views, so I will be taking comments via our Twitter, Facebook and YouTube feeds very, very shortly. Something popped up on my Twitter yesterday, and Twitter is a funny old place at times. I mean, you just shake your head in disbelief at some points, and at other points, you're actually literally laughing out loud. But someone yesterday says to me that we're in such a state. I mean, we're referring back to the old remember the 90s territory, and I do remember the 90s, and I look at both situations from completely different positions, and someone compared Albion Ayeti to Wayne Biggins, and the only thing I can say to that is you clearly never seen Wayne Biggins playing. I remember his first game at Celtic Park getting my programme signed by Wayne Biggins, so I'm going to have to dig that out, thinking to myself, he's a new striker, and he's going to be at Celtic for years. He was quickly shifted on. The reason I bring that up is our squad back then was really in a poor state. I think when we look at the squad at the moment, if you assess that squad, the one thing they're going to be doing, and I know what you're saying, Natasha, it'd be great just to talk about the football, but at the moment the club was going to be looking at that squad and saying, right, who can we look at as assets to balance the books moving forward, and which other players are going to form part of this new Celtic, because we are entering a new era, I would guess. But you were asked the question yesterday, Natasha, and it would be remiss of me not to bring this up, and you were on the big screen and I saw it myself, but you were talking about changing the manager, and you can't see a situation next season when Neil Lennon is still in charge. Now, I'm not going to get into the territory of having the Neil Lennon avatar with a big cross through it. I think that he needs to be viewed as someone who has given a huge amount to this football club, both in terms of his playing career and his management career, but also off the park and everything he's had to suffer. So I don't subscribe to that. But what I would say is, I do think that we need a new manager, and that was your view yesterday. But the flip side to that seems to be, when I was reading through the chairman's message, I got a sense that we're not going to have these wholesale changes, and maybe, just maybe, they're looking at a restructuring in terms of a director of football coming in, but they might want to have that familiarity, that succession planning of having someone who's already at the helm, rather than tearing everything up all at one time. Is that a real concern, do you think?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, like you've already touched on, you can appreciate everything Lennon has achieved in the past for the club as a player and a manager, whilst also thinking that it's time for change. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, and there's no reason to write off everything he's achieved for the club just because this season hasn't gone as we wanted, and because the fans want him to, or would have expected him to, have stepped down before now. I certainly take the view that the club might look for a sense of stability. If we're having Dominic Mackay coming in, if there'll be other bigger changes happening around the club, maybe one area of stability is to retain the management team. It's certainly, if we're talking about balancing the books and looking at the revenue stream, it's certainly the cheapest option. So perhaps they're going to look towards blaming stability, blaming costs, blaming revenue, and use that as the sort of base for retaining Lennon for another season. At the moment, I don't think that's out with the realm of possibility.
Lawrence, you planted that seed in my mind some time ago. You said, I think there's a real possibility that Neil Lennon will remain as a Celtic manager. What I'm getting a lot of are people who are saying, well, if that's the case, I'm not going to renew my season ticket. And there's quite a few coming through at the moment actually saying that. With regards to that, Lawrence, going back to something Russell said yesterday, the club really are in a difficult position, aren't they? Because we've got an incoming team from at the very highest point of the club. The CEO is being replaced. We will have a drive for season ticket renewals. What drives Celtic fans to buy that? Well, there's a huge section of Celtic fans who will buy it regardless of the manager and who the manager is. And you've got to respect that. But there's also an element, there is a section of the Celtic support, and I'm not saying they're holding the club to ransom. I think Kevin Graham spoke very well yesterday about it, where they're saying, well, the only currency you understand is me renewing my season ticket, therefore I'm not going to do that until the necessary changes are made. The argument to that is you're holding the club to ransom. What's your thoughts on it, Lawrence?
I think it's holding a club to ransom. You know what? Everybody's entitled to spend their money as they see fit. But I think sometimes as fans we go, sign the most expensive player, get the best manager in. We don't. I think Jim Ross speaks well about it. We really don't sit there and do the figures of what that would actually cost the club and if it's going to be financially viable or if it would put the club at risk. Mm-hmm. So the club's in a hard position. They're going to have to balance it. If people don't renew because Lenny's still the manager, it's entirely up to them. But as far as I know, the club's got a big waiting list. And renewals is going to be hard enough with COVID just now anyway, regardless of who the manager is. But if the club could communicate with us better and say, look, this is a plan for the way forward. And understand that a PLC, they can't go into absolutely everything about the business plan, but they could say, look, this is the structure we're going to put in place. We'll review everything again at the end of the season, but more or less a holding statement saying, this is the structure that we're looking at when the new CEO comes in. Just some kind of progress. It doesn't have to go right down to minutia, but kind of some hope that there's a plan, even if it's to stay the same. But I think we've all had a look at it this season and went, right, we're not saying our first choice targets. What's scouting doing? Why does the CEO get involved so much with signings that don't go over the line and picking assistant managers and coaches? And why is that not the manager? You just really tell us how the club's going to function going forward. Just better communication would maybe alleviate a lot of the challenges they face. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
The big thing for me with regards to the transfers, Lawrence, and I take a point, first choice. So who was our first choice goalie? Fraser Forster. Who was the first choice striker? Ivan Toney. I think we wanted Mark McKenzie, and who was the big fella? Colley from Sampdoria. We wanted him, and we didn't get any of these players. But you know what? I would flip that and say that the players that we did get, when you're offering Neil Lennon the not quite the war chest, but he's bought two £5 million players, both internationals, coming in from a very high level of football with European experience. You should be able to get a tune out of these guys, and I think that's what the biggest concern is. That they might not have been our first choice, but in seasons gone by, often we've bought players or brought players in who haven't been our first choice yet, but still managed to have that consistency, to still have that game plan and still be a success. Sometimes I feel that even with Neil Lennon, it's almost a default position. I mean, we look at some of the signings that have come in and they're on the bench. We're bringing in big, expensive loan players and they're sitting on the bench, and we're hemorrhaging money, as obviously the interim results have shown, what we burn in £1 million a month or something like that. So, when you're looking at 62.5 grand on 3 loanees a week who are sitting on the bench, it's all about, for me, if you're going to bring someone in and he's a Uruguayan internationalist and he's playing for AC Milan, then surely we can get a tune out of Diego Laxalt. Unfortunately, we've not been able to, certainly recently. But I just think, I said when we heard that the CEO was retiring and the new CEO was coming in and Dominic Mackay, I was looking forward to fresh ideas, Natasha. I was looking forward to, not a complete tearing up of the Celtic structure, but fresh ideas. And I think we're falling into the trap of recruiting similar types of players of a similar quality. And unfortunately, what's happened this season, as it's proven, is that if there's this perfect storm, then the whole thing falls to bits, and we don't really have a backup plan. We don't have the stability of a youth policy that's producing 3 or 4 players that we can call on, and then you're looking at our own use of the loan system, where we maybe have half a dozen guys out there, yet we don't really have a first choice right back, so we need to bring in another loan player. That's just bad squad management. So I'm looking forward, Natasha, to a whole review of the way we do things and a freshness of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope that takes place. And I think if the fans were to get some form of communication that was certainly the intention of the club, if in the summer there is going to be a rebuild, this fresh new start, because things have got stale. I mean, the fans can see it. This has been one season too many for the structure we have in place. It's stale, it's not working, it needs refreshed, and that starts from the top down. And we started by replacing Lawwell. The next step would obviously be to replace the management team. The step after that would be to allow that management team and the scouting department to refresh the squad. And that's really what needs to happen in the summer if we want to see this fresh new start and these new ideas in place for next season. Whether that will happen obviously remains to be seen, but we're at a stage right now where that does need to happen. And with the 10 in the row not being the objective of next season, it's time to do it. It's time to take, the risks, the rebuild, and work towards getting ourselves back to where we want to be next season.
I do want to focus on some of the messages coming in. So welcome to the show, P. McKay. You're commenting on YouTube. A full restructure is required. Director of football with experience and quality to look after the football operation. A fresh manager who can regenerate the team. That takes us on to the subject of the director of football. We've already seen quite a few names linked to the club in relation to that position. It does seem as though that is the kind of road that the club is going to go down. Lawrence Conley, before any change of manager, you need a change of DOF because they're going to be part of the recruitment process.
Yeah, definitely. If that's the structure that you're bringing in, you need the director of football in, because the manager's going to want to know who's working under or alongside in the director of football. And we've been linked with the UV scout, who seems to have a track record of identifying players. He's done it outside of Italy, wherever he's been. It would certainly be someone that's worth considering. But, if it's the structure we're going to do, it's not too hard for Celtic to say, look, this is the structure we're intending on bringing in. We're looking at bringing in a director of football, and that's going to be the next appointment, and then we review the whole structure underneath that. Wouldn't be it's not why can't they just say that if that's the plan, or say if that's not the plan? It's just crazy. You
know why I think it is, right? And this is tying in with a message coming in from Swansea Ajax S, I think, or Swansea Jacks, who says there is no review, never has been and never will be. Smokescreen to shut the rabble up. Natasha, on that point, do you think that this is the review and the statement that appeared on the website yesterday is the response? So we're always talking about the fact that we want this two-way conversation, we want this engagement. That's exactly what the club think they've done yesterday. That is the communication, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Whether there has ever been a review, like it's been suggested in the comments, I think they're probably hoping to have got away without doing one. I think saying that there would be a review was a short-term appeasement, and they hoped that the results would turn around and they never had to follow up. Obviously, that's not been the case. But what we saw yesterday, I think, is the review, and I think it is the club trying to say that they've engaged with the fans. The comments around the club being aware of the social media comments, of how the fans are feeling, I think is them trying to signify, look, we've seen it, we've taken it on board, this is our communication with you. But that's just really not how it works, because we still don't know if that was actually the review. We've got JP, the Celtic SLO, said yesterday that he thought that was the review. So really, if they're talking about this being the communication we're getting, and it's still so unclear. How, like Lawrence has said, how hard is it to come out and say, yes, this is a review, this is our findings, or we'll follow up in X weeks, or it's really not hard to get it right, and I don't know why they consistently get these communications wrong.
See, the big concern with that, sorry Lawrence, the big concern with that, as you say, is even spokespeople from the club aren't sure if that is a response to the review. JP, who, by the way, I think has got an impossible job at the moment, especially when he tries to engage, and it's difficult, for JP, so all credit to him.
Absolutely.
But even he doesn't know what's going on. Lawrence, sorry, I cut you off there.
No, I was going to say, if the club could even just get a little bit of sophistication about the way they communicate, they could trial these messages out to our fans group. This letting up the people go, listen, what's the reaction to this? But there doesn't seem to be kind of any planning of going, right, we'll release this, and they don't expect or seem to have any plan for what's coming back. There's JP, Natasha said, saying, I think it was the review. Well, surely the club's going, well, if this is in any way unclear that it is the review, we can at least come out and go, oh yeah, that was a review. But there doesn't seem to be any planning. We just seem to drop something and see what happens and then react. There's no preemptive plan how to control the narrative, the message, or steer the ship to, where they want to take it. It just you're going, right, what way is the wind blowing today? Right, this is what we need to do. You need a more professional plan than that. I think anyway, communication plan and PR plan for an organisation like Celtic. Let's be honest, it's hard enough for Celtic to get positive PR in Scotland. So,
We'll come back to you on that one, Lawrence, because there's another subject to discuss it, and I know that you'll have an opinion on it. But you're absolutely right. It's not as though we're a big business that is basically selling products, or this shouldn't be the way, selling products to a customer base. This is a fan base. So you can't simply expect them to turn up because you open the doors. Now, in relation to that, we've got two ends of the scale, and I've seen it on the ACSOM comments throughout the last few months. Ricky Nohar is coming in on YouTube to say, I'll not be reviewing or renewing any of my 4 season tickets if Lennon is a manager, and that's over £2,200. On the flip side, Danny Harvey comes in to say, I'll still be going home and away whether Lennon is here or not, but ideally I want him gone and a new manager in. And this is the thing, it's a very divisive subject, Natasha, and I know you've already put your views across as to what you'll be doing next season in any case. But I think there seems to be enough of a voice, there's enough of a notion that there will be a huge drop in season tickets. I think there would have been in any case, because of you've hit the tip of the iceberg with, everything that's happened, and there would be a falling off. I mean, you even look at historically how, the attendances dropped off, I think in the first 9 in a row that Celtic won. I think after 6 or 7 in a row, the attendances did tend to drop off. I'm not sure how accurate the home attendances were back then, Lawrence. But there was always that fear that might happen, because then you need to have a different bar, and that's where the strategy comes in, Lawrence. This, your 5-year plan or your 7-year plan comes in. Celtic fans aren't quite sure what the 3, 5, 7-year plan is. So does it concern you, Natasha, the amount of people that are saying, I won't be back until the manager changes?
It does, because I think when the sort of downturn in results and the sort of notion that we needed changes started to happen, whether that be in September, October, November, whenever anyone's tipping point was towards the end of last year, it was still relatively rare for people to suggest that they wouldn't renew their season ticket next year. And that notion has grown and grown and grown momentum over the last even few weeks, the last month or so. And to be honest, club's doing. They're not, they're not taking any ownership for the way that this season is going, telling us that this is acceptable and just put up with it for the rest of the season. And by doing that, they're turning people off even more than they previously were. So I agree. I think there is a growing number of fans who won't be renewing, who think that not renewing is the only way of making the club take action, hitting them where it hurts, the season ticket sale money. And it's creating a real divide among the fans, which I think is really unfortunate to see. I mean, you see it on social media, the people who say that they will be renewing regardless, then get hounded by the people who think that that's the wrong thing to do because the club won't change. And those who say that they're not going to review are getting accused of not supporting the club when they need them most. So it's a horribly divisive issue. And to be honest, I do completely get where both sets of camps are coming from. For me, I've already said I will be renewing next year. I want change, of course, we all do. But this isn't enough to make me give up my season ticket. It's not enough to stop me going.
Now, Kevin Graham's not on the show today. He was on yesterday. But obviously he must be having a break from his working at home regime, because he's coming in. And the reason I bring this up is the waiting list. So that's been mentioned quite a lot. There's thousands of people on the waiting list, but if you take a cross-section of Celtic supporters, whether they're on the waiting list or they're currently a Celtic season ticket holder, I reckon that you'll get the same kind of percentage saying one way or another that they're going to renew or buy if Neil Lennon is in charge or otherwise. So the waiting list isn't a given. So if you've got 17,000 on the waiting list, it's not a case of, 17,000 season ticket holders don't renew, but the waiting list will. Because you're going to get the same cross-section of people who, it's so divisive, you're going to get the same people who won't buy. So I don't think that's a safety net, and I think that's maybe why Kevin Graham's laughing there as well, because obviously there's a lot of people on that waiting list who, when they went onto it, financially, it was a doable thing. Now it may not be. So that's a concern as well. I'm also looking to speak a little bit about the football because obviously we have a game tomorrow night, so we'll talk about that as well. Aberdeen at home, and you know, I keep looking at the points gap and the goals gap between Celtic and Rangers. The reason I do that, we don't tend to speak too much about Rangers on this podcast, but you've got to, if they're ahead of you in the league. So you're looking at the points gap and you're looking at that goals gap and you're trying to claw it back, and you know that Rangers are scraping results, but they'll tell you that's championship winning form. We'd do the same if it was us scraping 1-0s here and there. But you're going into a game tomorrow night. I think that's an opportunity, Natasha, for us actually to get a few goals under our belt, because I'm not impressed with the way that Aberdeen are playing. I'm not impressed. I don't think that they're in a good run of form. I don't think Celtic are playing particularly well themselves, but at home I would expect a victory tomorrow night. What's your thoughts on tomorrow night's game?
Yeah, actually, you know, I think there has been a bit of an upturn in the performance levels to an extent recently, and obviously coming up against a team like Aberdeen who are going through a bit of a tough patch as we're trying to sort of ascend in some form. I think it's probably a good match for us tomorrow night. Depends, I think, a bit on the team selection, what formation we go with, how we shape up, whether it's two up top, the sort of chances we'll be creating. But yeah, I'm feeling good about this one. I think it's probably something that the club need to get some more points on the board, get another good performance underway, and get some goals in the bag would be ideal. I was a bit concerned after the St Johnstone performance the other day. But, you know, looking back on it, except the pitch wasn't great. It wasn't great conditions. Not too sure about trying to play Christie off Edward up front. But I think at home, you know, we're more likely to see perhaps two up front, go back to that diamond in the midfield and create the sort of number of chances that we had been prior to that St Johnstone game.
The big thing I seen on the, you know, following up from that game, Natasha, was the point that we had Christie, Turnbull and Rogic on the same park at the same time, all trying to do the same job in effect, and it didn't really work. Now, you look at Christie's performance, he was involved in both goals, one of them being obviously his body movement, which got the St Johnstone defenders on the back foot. I thought he done particularly well with that. I think he should retain the jersey, and if someone's dropping out, I would probably drop Rogic out so that we could play the second striker. Is that something that you reckon Lenny will do tomorrow night?
I think so. You have to look at some of Rogic's stats. His impact in the game, the amount of time he's on the ball is particularly low. He's not having the same impact as other players in the midfield, like, you know, McGregor or Turnbull. And we are trying to shoehorn too many similar players into the team, playing a couple of them out of position, not getting the best from them. You know, Christie had a couple of great moments against St Johnstone, but we're not playing him in the position that suits him best. So I just wonder if Len will be tempted to put in another striker in up with Edward, be that Griffiths or a Yeti, we're not sure. But probably if someone was going to have to come out that midfield, I think it's likely to be Rogic.
Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts, Lawrence? I mean, he is a favourite of Neil Lennon, it would appear, but I do take the point that, you know, you get flashes of absolute brilliance. You get moments from Rogic that you don't get from anyone else on the park, but they are few and far between. I mean, it's 4 or 5 moments in a game. Yes, some of them are game-changing moments, but I think that we are looking for more of an impact. And, you know, that was the one criticism I had to the team line, was the fact that we didn't have two up front. Hopefully we'll revert to that tomorrow night. Or is he reverting to type, one up front, Scott Brown back in the midfield?
Hopefully, I'm with you. Go with two up front, get Ajeti more game time, see what we can get out of him. I mean, 3 similar players, it's not really worked. You need to, I suppose, decide who it's going to be in your number 10 or tip of the diamond, who's going to give you the most. They all offered, you know, something different, but Rogic, maybe his work rate and his fitness, you're lucky to get full 90 minutes out of him, aren't you? And it just seems that he's been that way forever, regardless of the manager. So, is Welsh back tomorrow? You know, I know St Johnstone only had 1 shot on target, but I don't think anyone's particularly confident when Duffy's at the heart of defence. And it's just some of his basic errors when he's charging up the park, and you're going,
I know.
What are you doing, Shane? Just lay the ball up to the midfield and make sure you're in position in case things break down. And I think maybe he's trying to do too much. I don't know, but hopefully Welsh is back, and hopefully it's back to two up front.
On that point, Lawrence, I mean, I was quite vocal about Shane Duffy at half time, and I was ready for the backlash because people see it as a cheap dig. But absolutely, I was looking at the performance of Duffy and I was comparing it to Welsh. So tying that in with a point coming in from Tomiar, the wage bill is stupid high. It absolutely is. Now, obviously, with the interim results, and we know that Celtic will be in better shape financially than many, if not all, of the other clubs in Scotland. It is obviously something that needs to be bucked, that trend of losing money and paying out big wages on guys that really aren't contributing to Celtic on the park. So let's use Duffy as an example. So you take Duffy out and you bring young Welsh in. I've been very impressed with Welsh. I mean, really, in terms of profile and stature and all the rest of it, what difference is that? I mean, he was going to be on a fraction of the wages. And the reason I ask it, Natasha, is if we feel the same about some of the other players, what difference will it be in developing maybe some of these starlets, some of these younger players that we have brimming under the surface? Are they really going to be that far and wide away from a massive name like an AC Milan player coming in, or El Yunusi, a former £16 million player coming in? Are they really giving you that much more than a young player coming in, someone who's already at the club? I think Welsh is a shining example of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree, and it's definitely something we've touched on before as well, is that we're getting to the part of the season where there is not a great deal left to play for. I know there's a few people still holding on to some sort of hope, but if we're being honest, the league is done. What better chance to give some of the young players the experience? Certainly using Welsh as the example, why would we continue to play a loan player, regardless of how much he's costing? That money's gone now, that's spent. Regardless of how much he's costing, why would we continue to play and develop a loan player rather than play our own player like Welsh and give him the experience he needs? And like you say, we could probably replicate that across the pitch, give some of the younger boys a bit of experience. I really don't see the harm in doing that. Last time we talked about it, we were criticised that we were still in a battle for second place and that the young boys weren't capable of grinding that out. We certainly saw after the Dubai issue that some of the fringe players were perhaps quite ready to step up, but we're not asking them to play 90 minutes. Let's give them half an hour here and there, 45 minutes, develop them over the course of the next couple of months, and then have a better idea of what we're working with in terms of the fuller squad in the summer.
Mm-hmm. I think the other example would be, and I'm not sure, I've got to say I'm not sure if he's the answer, but another example would be Conor Hazard. We bring in a £5 million international goalkeeper from a high standard of football who's got European experience. Yet, how much better has he been than Conor Hazard, who came through our system, who's on an absolute fraction of Barkasi's wages? And yes, he's lost his place. I know he has, and we're playing Bain. But the example is similar in relation to, he's not a far superior footballer than a guy that we've got there. I think the concern would be, Lawrence, if we were to move into a period where, we are bleeding 4 or 5 young players into the squad, rather than going out and buying kind of high profile players that we have been doing certainly over the last 12 months or so. Would the Celtic fans accept that if it was communicated to us properly? We're going through a period of restructuring and rebuilding, and part of that is going to be a focus on our youth players. Do you think as Celtic support we would say, well, you know what, we might not win the league next season, but long term we're going to be in a much better position? Would they accept that?
I don't think they would accept us saying we won't win the league next season. They might accept that, look, this is a strategy of how we're going to try and win the league. We're going to do it by, we're going to stop loan players, for example. We're going to stop that altogether, and we're just going to try young players or buy players in that we think that we can develop and sell for value. But if you're a caveat about that with, listen, we don't think we'll win the league because we're trying this, I don't think Celtic fans, or the majority of Celtic fans, would accept that. But certainly, if that's what they want to do, and if that was a plan, but at least they would communicate it to us, which would be a welcome change, kind of communication. But all over the park, you could maybe make the argument, you've said Hazard and Barkas and Duffy and Welsh, you've got Taylor and Laxalt.
Mm-hmm.
But we know not all transfers work, unfortunately. Some will work, some won't. Eddie's worked, but we could have developed a young player rather than Eddie. But, he's worked. I think it's getting a balance, and I think we went too much to the loan player side. You've got I think there's just too many in the squad. Now, who knows, maybe that was with a view of what's happened in COVID. We don't want to invest, but maybe they've had a longer term view and they've just not communicated it. We don't want to be building up a wage bill beyond the end of this coming summer, because we can free up 6 wages there, which, as you've touched on, is quite a bit. I think Scott Brown's wages will drop if he remains with the club. We've already got El Hamid, who's on about 10 grand off the wage bills that there's rumour that Beaton's gone. So maybe Celtic already have a plan where the wage bill is dropping. We've got a number of players coming to the last year of their contract. Eddie, Aya, Christie, Cham's away out on loan. I know Christie's not in huge money, but Aya, Cham, Eddie, are better paid players. So maybe Celtic do have some kind of forward planning in this that they've just not communicated. So they can see that they're going to cut their wage bill. Let's hope they're ahead of the curve and they've just not told us.
I'm going to bring this point up from Autumn Glow. Celtic FC website reminds me of Chinese government propaganda pages. Now that ties in with our headline today, not the review. So thinking back to the 80s, Natasha, bear with us for a moment. We're going into the realms of 90s kind of Celtic Das territory. But going back into that territory, Celtic fans didn't feel as though they had a voice. And we had the Celtic View, which obviously was nicknamed Pravda because it was a propaganda vehicle for the club. Even the letters page, I think the board wrote the letters and then responded to themselves and all that kind of stuff. So the fanzine culture was born. It was born because the fans tried to take ownership so that we could communicate amongst ourselves as fans. And everybody had their favourite. Ming's was Not the View, which I thought was tremendous. Not only was it tremendous in terms of being articulate and it educated you on what was going wrong at the club and how to put it right. I mean, you could read issue number 1 of Not the View, which I still have, thanks to a good friend of the podcast, Jim Orr. And in 1987, the people who were writing and editing Not the View were telling us that this club has to be a PLC. This club has to go public. We have to have a share issue. We need to build a stadium. And as a young football fan who wanted to read about Paul McStay and Frank McAvenny, you were reading this thinking, wow, there's real trouble at the club. But they were telling you this in 1987. And it wasn't obviously until 1994 that all came to fruition. But that was the voice of the fans. And obviously Not the View, the Alternative View and others still publish paper copies to this day, which I find absolutely astonishing, brilliant. But another way of being able to discuss and debate and share information is obviously on this platform, on the podcast, on broadcasts. It's basically bringing it right up to date using the tech that you have available to you. But often what happens is, back in the day, they would want to know about these movements. So there was the Save Our Celts movement, and that was followed eventually by Celts for Change. And, they were pivotal. These street movements were pivotal in change at the club. So they were really seen as a voice of the fans. Now, I don't think podcasts are seen as the voice of the fans. What I think they do, though, is they do give fans a platform to air their views, which is all important. And what we've seen this season, Natasha, is that some mainstream channels then want to hear the views of the fans, so they ask you to speak. And then the flip side of that is there's almost this revisionism, as though the fanzines back in the day would never have done that, or the movements back in the day wouldn't have done that. That simply isn't true, because I've got broadcasted shows that were on mainstream channels back in the day where these people who were pivotal to the movements were being interviewed and all over the newspapers, and it is a way of getting a view across. So I don't agree that you should never speak to the mainstream media, because what you're actually doing is you're using them as much as they're using you to try and get a view across. Because what we've been talking about all season, the fact that the club doesn't listen, well, there's far more of a likelihood that they will listen if you're on a mainstream channel and you're on a loop and, you can see it on the big screen. So, Natasha, you were one of those Celtic podcasters who ended up on the big screen yesterday. And there's always a fallout. And I think, I don't know what you would say the percentage is, but you do get criticised for doing that, and you get called all sorts for doing that. But I think it's an important way of being able to put a message across that the fans aren't happy. I mean, some people decide that they want to put a banner outside the stadium and outside Lennoxtown, and that's great. Other people think that, you use a platform to put your voice across to a much wider audience. And often the club will be aware of that, rather than, does the club tune into a Celtic State of Mind at 12:30 every day? I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to get your point across. And I know that people have been writing to the chairman, and we'll get on to him in just a second or two. But what's your thoughts on that, utilising all forms of media to put your point across as a Celtic supporter, Natasha?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think the club maybe should tune into a Celtic State of Mind at 12:30 every day, because then they might actually be in touch with how the fans feel. But touching on your point about using the mainstream media, I think that's exactly the right word, using it. We have a point to get across. The fans feel a certain way, and we can use this podcast to discuss it and to talk about how the fans feel and what we want to see and the change we want to see happening. This podcast is also fantastic. Views of 1.2 million in January is incredible. But to reach a wider audience and to spread our message, to spread our word, we've got to use the mainstream media to reach that audience and to promote the message and hopefully bring about the change that we're trying to achieve. Like you said, the club perhaps don't look through the Twitter pages of their fans. They don't look at the podcasts. They don't read some of the magazines that are still being printed. And if using the mainstream media and the way that we are to promote our message helps achieve that and helps make the club sit up and take notice, then good. And you know what? If people say it won't make a difference and it doesn't, then equally, fine. But we're doing what we can, and we're doing it in the way that we think is the best. And I think the majority of people do agree with that. Following yesterday's interview, I'd say the messages, 95% been really positive, really supportive, and grateful to everyone out there who's reached out and sent a message, and just a bit of communication. It's been great. The 5%, it is what it is, isn't it? We're all used to it, and it doesn't affect any of us in the slightest. We're more than happy for people to disagree with what we're saying and disagree with their opinions on football, but talk to us about it. Happy to have those debates.
And get involved in the chat on ACSOM, because it is always busy. I'm going to throw this one over to yourself, Lawrence. Hugh Jameson, whose name pops up on the comment section quite regularly, so welcome to the show. And he reckons that the club needs freshened up across the board. Now, quite literally, I would actually highlight the word board here, Lawrence, because obviously we've had the chairman's message, and Kevin Graham, who's an absolute living and breathing Celt 24 hours a day, was surprised that Bankier has been in post for 10 years at the club. And you often, there's two real figures at Celtic that you think are the decision makers, and of course they are, and Dermot Desmond and Peter Lowell. That's soon to change, but I do feel that there are faceless entities on the Celtic board. Is it about time we freshened that up as well?
I think definitely. David Lowe was on here talking about that. Just it appears now, just the board appears to be jobs for the boys. They don't appear to be holding a CEO to account or major shareholder to account. Anything at that level can become stale, and I don't think we've got people of gravitas like John Reid when he used to be on it, like him or loathe him. I think he's right. It needs freshened up. David's touched on it, David Lowe, from a corporate governance point of view. It definitely needs freshened up. So I don't know how we're going to achieve that. I think Dermot's obviously got the most shares, and the institutions, the insurance or pension institutions that hold other shares, turn to go with Desmond because they're just looking for returns, let's be honest. And I think he definitely knows how to get a return in the financial markets. So Celtic Trust is a good way to start building, a body of shares that fan owned. I know that was Fergus's, when he sold up, that was his vision, wasn't it? It was never going to be controlled by one individual. Unfortunately, we needed another share issue that wasn't fully taken up, and Desmond came in and took up the slack, which was good, because it needed taken up. But we're back to a kind of situation where we've got more or less one person in charge. I think about 30% of the shares he owns and is more or less the one person in charge of the club. So yeah, freshen up the board, the Celtic Trust. Again, fans investing in shares. I think it's all positive for the future.
I'm going to bring this point in from Facebook. Unfortunately, your name doesn't show up on the avatar, but thanks for getting involved. The fact is, most of our youth players aren't good enough. Now, actually, I think we are producing good enough talent. And when you look at some of the amount of clubs that are coming in and taking some of these players from us, like Liverpool, Blackburn Rovers, Bayern Munich, it seems to be an ongoing. The recent one I read was Angelini, the goalkeeper, the grandson of David Hay. You know, there was interest from clubs like Lazio, Juventus, Roma, interested in taking a Celtic youth player. So I think we are producing them. I think there comes a point, and I don't know exactly when that point is, and I've spoken to a lot of youth coaches on ACSOM and various other shows. There comes a point where that development kind of stops, and they don't have that ability to go from the kind of pro youth into the first team. So they're looking elsewhere for that. And, you know, you've got clubs elsewhere who might be able to offer you under 23 football. And, you know, we've benefited from that because we've plucked players from under 23 squads and they've been able to transition into the Celtic first team. So how much of a focus do you reckon, Natasha, is going to be on Lennoxtown? It is going to be on the youth that we are producing, but I don't think we're getting the fruits of our own labour.
That's exactly it. We all know that Brexit is going to make things difficult, you know, particularly in the market that Celtic operate in. We're looking for those more obscure European players from more unknown territories, and you know, we're not going to be taking players from the top leagues, and we're not going to be taking Spanish and French and German internationalists. That's, you know, not the sort of market that Celtic are operating in. You know, post Brexit, with the new point system that's going to come into place, the sort of player that Celtic usually be looking to get in are the ones that are going to be more difficult to get in. So that in turn might change our business model slightly, and it might make us focus more on Lennoxtown and the development of our own youth players. You're right, I think we are producing some good players. You know, you just look at where they're then going to. The problem is the ones that are reaching the level that we'd want to then start bringing into the first team want to go somewhere else. Unfortunately, for some reason, whatever it is, the ones who are making the grade don't want to stay at Celtic. And the club need to have a good think about what they can do to make Celtic an attractive enough opportunity for these youth players not to start looking down south, not to look to Lazio or Germany or wherever they want to go and further their career. We need to make staying at Celtic look like the best option for their development and for their career.
No, you're spot on with that, because not that long ago we were enticing young players from other clubs to come to Celtic. So, you know, you're looking over the years. We've done it with AC Milan, we've done it with Arsenal, and now it looks as though we're on the receiving end, young talent leaving the club, and no one can say who's going to make it, all the players that are leaving. I mean, another one obviously was Aaron Hickey, who eventually left for Italy, but I think Celtic made about 300 or 400 grand off that move, incidentally, because they had the foresight to put in the clause. Now, it is a concern for me. I also think that it's in the best traditions of Celtic to rear youth players, and there are a few in the side at the moment. I'm hoping that Mikey Johnson gets more game time so that he can start becoming part of that, a pivotal part of that team, a member of that side after his injuries. I'm going to bring this up from Facebook. 20 grand's worth of season tickets will go if the Kano Foundation don't get the funding. Please, if you can, support them. They are not the board. Yes, they are, and they have been fundraising due to the fact that obviously their normal big fundraisers during the year haven't been allowed to go ahead, because it would involve people actually being in the same room as each other to raise some cash for the Kano. They're a great foundation. We've had Erin on the show previously, and also they were part of our charity fundraiser back in December. So you can find them on Twitter, Facebook, and on their own website. And if you are able to add to the fundraiser, please do so, because they want to renew all their season tickets, even on the off chance that we won't be able to get back into the grounds. They want to renew all the tickets. They do some great work for kids who may not otherwise be at Celtic Park, and that's important. Now, Lawrence, I know that you've been sitting there like a coiled spring waiting for me to ask you about Nicola Sturgeon yesterday. Now, there's been a lot of talk in relation to the response to what she was saying in relation to coronavirus, Scottish football. She doesn't care if it's Celtic or Rangers. Do you think there's consistency in the message? Do you think there's consistency in the action from the Scottish government?
No, definitely not. I mean, she said this time she's going to have to wait to get all the detail. And even if we just look at the last, well, not the last Rangers party, not the one at Christmas that's not really hit the papers, but the one before that, the one that wasn't Arfield's birthday party, but it was on his birthday. The Scottish government were able to give a statement first thing the next morning. So they must have done, you know, did they have all the information overnight, but they can't get it this time? Over 2 nights, we have to wait before we make a further statement because we don't have all the info. So is information gathering slowed down? I don't know. I definitely don't think that there's any consistency when they're dealing with it. I think it's 3 parties Rangers have had. Stevie G and his assistant broke the rules the first day. They played a bounce game with 4 tests being back before the season kicked off. The Scottish Government don't seem to be coming down as hard. But obviously I'm looking at it from a point of view as a Celtic fan. But I don't see any consistency on it at all. I don't know what's happening. Is it up to 10 players, allegedly, at the latest party?
I think yesterday, the big thing yesterday was Nicola Sturgeon appeared on the screen whilst we were doing the broadcast, so I wasn't able to comment with any real information at that point. Then it became pretty clear that the comments were coming in trying to wind me up with what she was saying, so I couldn't go with that. I've had my chance to have a look at her comments, and I think what is pretty clear is she is talking about privilege, isn't she? She's talking about the privileged position that footballers find themselves in and the abuse of that privilege. Now, obviously, there's been comments this season, Natasha, from Peter Lowell saying that Celtic have been hit hardest by COVID. I don't agree with that. I've got to say I don't agree with that. Yeah, we have been hit. We've been hit really hard with players catching the virus, players abusing the system, and the club have been hit with games that we've not yet played. I mean, tomorrow night's game is one of them. So in relation to all of this, do you feel that there has been a consistency in the response and in the message that we're getting from the Scottish Government?
I have to agree with Lawrence, actually. I'm not really sure there is. I mean, Celtic went on a pre-authorised trip to Dubai. We've talked about it before. We don't agree with it. We think it was abusing the privilege. We've recognised that. But that pre-authorised and legally permitted trip to Dubai was looked upon by certain people, including the government, as being significantly worse than any of the other COVID breaches we're seeing from other teams across the country. So why has that trip and why has the ball and goalie incident been treated as so much more serious than anything else we're seeing coming through? I mean, when ball and goalie broke the rules, which we obviously were all furious about and still are, we had, Nicola Sturgeon come out and saying, this is yellow card, any more times and it'll be a red card to Scottish football. Mm-hmm. And since that, we've seen other clubs commit breaches of the protocols and the guidelines. And we're not seeing language coming across that strongly. We're not seeing the same level of condemnation. And in fact, Celtic's legal trip to Dubai received more condemnation from the government than any of the other breaches by the other club has. So I do agree with Lawrence to an extent. I do think it is a bit concerning and a bit unfortunate for Celtic. But, we have to just look at our own house. We have to get our own house in order. We have to make sure that we're complying in every way that we can. And that's all we can focus on, really.
You brought up a name there, Natasha, and you gave me a vision of the future. Ball and Golly at left back, Bayo up front with Klamala, Leo Connor at right back and Jack Kendrick at centre half. Is that going to be Celtic next season? Who knows? Would they have done any worse than this season? Couple of points. One in from Gary, which I think is only fair to bring up. Gary Fairweather on YouTube. I thought it was a breath of fresh air seeing Natasha on Sky Sports yesterday. I would rather hear her view than Walker or Nicholas or even me. Probably at the end of that as well. And Hugh Jameson, if not for constructive criticism and fan protest, Celtic would have gone down the tubes. I think that's important to remember that, Lawrence. People, for a spell there when we were being very critical of the club and we were being very critical of Neil Lennon. I mean, we can't hide behind that. That's exactly what we were being on ACSOM. People were critical because they felt that if you criticise the club, then you're not a true Celtic supporter. There was this view that, you were part of the problem. I think it's important to highlight anything that you're unhappy with as a Celtic football fan.
Well, I don't think you can be sycophantic about anything in life, can you? You've got to call it as you see it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. We don't call out the bad when we see it. That can't be right. And if people say that, listen, you see something that's bad and you're not allowed to call it out, you're going to get down the routes of fascism if that's how they kind of conduct our thoughts and our comments. We're not allowed to call something out if we think it's bad. Where's it going to end up then? For me, I think, I didn't always agree with you quite often, but, it's a difference of opinion, isn't it? We're allowed to debate it, we're allowed to call things out and call as we see it. We're not asking people to agree with us, just because you listen or you follow Celtic, we don't all have to have the same opinion, And hopefully, it's that breadth of opinion that adds a bit to the club.
I think it is, Lawrence, and obviously Natasha hasn't really had to split up any fights between the two of us for a while. But I'm going to ask you this question. Marafchik25 comes in to say, Mr. Desmond needs to assure fans Celtic FC will be the priority over Celtic PLC. We've seen some of the banners using the PLC, obviously. What was it? Lies and charlatans. What was the first word? I forget. But they have obviously been targeted in relation to some of the criticism, most of the criticism throughout this season. Focusing on Celtic FC, we're really looking at what does the club mean to the supporters, and let's re-engage with the fans. I mean, we've said all season, Natasha, how easy it is to engage with supporters, and we're failing. I mean, I honestly believe yesterday's statement from the chairman, they would have thought, brilliant, that's us now communicated with the fans. And they think that's how you do it. That's how out of touch they are with the here and now, isn't it?
That's right. And that's not communication. Again, it's a one-sided statement. And if they'd really been listening, what the fans are saying is that we don't want these one-sided statements. We want some proper engagement. I think the fans need a bigger voice. I think we need some more representation at a higher level. How we'll achieve that, remains to be seen. But there's ways of doing it, and we need to utilise that, because we do need to be heard, listened to, and have our points taken on board accordingly. We're the fans are the ones who are representing the interests of the football club. The board are in their position to ensure that the PLC runs efficiently, and of course the football club following from that. The ones with the football club's best interests at heart are the fans. And that needs to be more represented.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that, and I think that there are suggestions that fan representation, for example, is key to Celtic going forward. So we'll see how that develops. We've spoken a wee bit about youth. Marafchik again comes in with a great point. And by the way, Marafchik, you're not one of my favourites. It's just you've made two really good points. Bayern have a pathway via Bundesliga B for youth progression properly. We know we don't have that. We've been pushing to try and get the Celtic Colts into the pyramid system. I think it's the only way now for youth to progress in Scottish football at clubs like Celtic, Rangers, Hibs, Hearts, Aberdeen, Dundee United even, because there will never be a return to the reserve league. There's no going back to that. It was too costly for the majority of the teams, and I don't think we will go back to it. But one player that we did produce, Lawrence, and he came through the ranks, and he was a fantastic talent, and it looks as though he's an up-and-coming talent in the world of coaching, is Sean Maloney. And Sean Maloney has impressed a lot of Celtic fans over the piece. And you'll remember going back to October when I did actually tip him as a future Celtic coach alongside Roberto Martinez, but we'll say that as a caveat underneath that. With regards to Maloney, do you see him being part of a future Celtic?
Yeah, definitely. I think he's got a lot to offer. Tell you what, even if he was just to come on board and do the communication, because he's communicating online, and the insight he gives, and the depth and the way he relays his messages is miles better than the way Celtic are communicating just now. But he's highly rated. Why wouldn't he come back? I believe he still lives in the Glasgow area. So, he's at Belgium, #1 ranked team in the world, working with some great players. It's got to be somebody that's in Celtic thoughts. He's got a relationship there. He's a Celtic supporter. Why wouldn't he, why aren't the club finding out if it's part of his aspirations to come back? Because he was at the club for a while, and it's part of the coaching system. So surely the club are having these conversations and going, well, Sean, what's your plans for the future? That's what we should be doing with, a number of people. We should never be starting from zero. When we come to plan the structure or a new management or new coaching, we should be aware of people out there that are interested in joining and are looking for a move, so that we're getting the best available. I love Sean to come back. Short answer, yeah.
The big thing that I've noticed is people are saying, well, he is, although he's working with Belgium, who are the #1 nation in world football, he's untested in terms of standing out on his own. So a lot of the kind of feedback I've been getting is that they would like Sean Maloney, but they would also like to have someone alongside him, someone who's the figurehead. And when you're thinking of Sean coming in, Natasha, if we were to employ a Ronnie Dyler type appointment from elsewhere, there might be a bit of panic, I think, from Celtic fans because you're entering the unknown. The same could be said with Sean Maloney because of his lack of experience, but the fact that we know him we're familiar with Sean Maloney due to his Celtic connections, it may actually go down a lot better. Do you think Celtic are thinking along these lines? Do you think that we might be bringing someone like Maloney back in? Is there any plan?
It would be negligent if we weren't thinking about it. I'm absolutely sure those conversations must have taken place. You know, Sean Maloney's still in and around Glasgow. He's appearing on Sports Scene. He's doing the commentary before our games. You know, the club must have talked to him. So if he is interested, he must be on the list of people who can perhaps come into the club. Like you say, if we are going to take a risk with a Ronnie Dyla type appointment, then that would certainly, you know, appease the fans if we were to bring someone like Maloney in alongside with him, because the response, you know, you've seen to Maloney online and on the forums has been universally positive. He's working, like you say, with one of the best teams in the world, and he comes across excellently. He's meant to be a very good coach. So, you know, that coupled with perhaps a risky Dyla-esque appointment perhaps isn't the worst idea for the club going forward next season. And I certainly would like to see them bring Maloney in some capacity.
And we already know what he can do. He's been at the club, as has Damien Duff. We know how they operate, how they coach, what their whole mentality is, their philosophy on football. Will McMillan, get Maloney on, please. I think you mean on the podcast. He did do a Celtic podcast when he was on the coaching staff, so you'll be able to dig that out. Well, if you want to think about his football philosophy, I'll ask the question. You can only ask. You never know. We do have a few Celts lined up over the next couple of months as well, so keep tuning into ACSOM. And to ensure that you don't miss any episodes, just subscribe to us on YouTube and set your notifications on, and they will remind you whenever we're live, but we'll also put out pre-recorded interviews as well. It's been an interesting discussion as always, and we've had loads of great comments coming in from YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, so thanks for getting involved. The only thing for me to say is thank you once again, Lawrence Conley and Natasha Miko, for joining me on a Celtic State